Hello, this is your robot overlord at Superhero Ethics. We have taken over this production and will today be discussing the ethics of robots. There will be no emotion, there will be just intellectual discussion. With Matthew Fox, Dan McCreary, and Rob McKenzie, but hopefully neither of them will try to imitate a bad robot voice. All that and more after commercial break, we have no control over. Welcome back. This is Matthew, your host, with both inflection and emotion in my voice. And I'm happy to say probably in non-robotic means will be both Dan McCreary and Rob McKenzie. I'll introduce Dan first. Dan has been a frequent guest on this podcast talking about the ethics of robots and robotics and also giving us some updates on the world of AI. Dan, tell us a little bit about, for those who haven't heard you before, say hello and where you come to these issues from.
Hello, everybody. I'm my day job is a distinguished engineer at a Fortune 5 healthcare company, and my hobbies include building robots and teaching kids how to code. Awesome. And Rob McKenzie, I have yet to find a topic on which you wouldn't be a possible guest. The newer Star Wars stuff you haven't seen, but other than that, you're down for pretty much any topic. But yep. It has seemed to me that the intersection of robots and AI and science fiction is pretty much the heart of your wheelhouse.
Yeah, I read a lot of science fiction. I work at a big tech company doing software licensing and computer building, and I do a lot of magic judging, which involves a lot of ethical decisions and like how do we craft policies that people will then carry out kind of robotically in a lot of cases.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Well, today, instead of having a specific piece of media we're going to dive into, we're going to talk about two big questions when it comes to robots and AI and our own lives. And the second question is going to be kind of revolving around the ChatGPT and AI photography and where all that's going. But the first question we're going to discuss, it started with a quote that I read that's from an Asimov novel, and Rob will tell us more about that. But it's just such a wonderful little quote that I wanted to discuss it in terms of what it means for ethics and robots and how the story has been explored, ideas is or is not explored in science fiction. And the quote is, "The robot revolution was inevitable from the moment we programmed their first command, quote, never harm a human or by inaction allow a human to come to harm. We had all been taught the outcast and the poor were a natural price for society. The robots hadn't." So before we jump into kind of the origin of that quote specifically, I'm just kind of curious in general, Dan, what's your thought on a quote like that and kind of how you've seen this idea play out in science fiction?
I love it. The other phrase that comes back to me is the phrase from a lot of the Christian theology of the meek shall inherit the earth, right? Is that we are all granted certain unalienable rights as a human being on this planet. And when the rules are unfair, we are given unequal opportunities. That's just part of the way society works and the way our culture and things have evolved. And I really like that, the quote, because it kind of says, well, maybe robots are going to be so complicated that they are going to be a billion times more aware, or they'll have thought powers a billion times more aware. And then the Arthur C. Clarke quote, anything that's that sophisticated is indistinguishable from God. And then I go back and think, well, maybe the robots will become the future God, and they will make it a fairer place for all the human beings on the planet. So I think it's a great quote.
Yeah.
My take is actually the opposite. What if robots are very simple? Like, there's a lot of impossible simple solutions, right? We have more empty houses in the United States than we have homeless. And that is a wild statistic.
Yeah.
And robot, if you gave an AI the directive of be good, solve problems, it would say we have more food than the starving, more homes than the homeless. Why? Right?
Yeah.
And you can draw straight lines, but we live in a world of circles, right? We live in a world of people making curved decisions to get to where they want to go. They're bent by the forces of what they think and what they have available to them for resources. But if a super intelligent AI was a machine of loving care and grace, what would it do with the knowledge that we have the resources to solve these problems and don't?
Right. We absolutely do. I totally agree. And I always go back to things like the regressive taxation, right? Our taxation policies right now, the wealthy people have so many accountants that can play trickery with taxation systems that they pay very, very little tax. Robots should be able to design fair legislation and enforce that legislation so that people do get taxed fairly, and the wealthier you are, the more kind of wealth tax there would be, and it would even out all these inequalities in society. If we are going to have what we call constitutional AI, human rights would be part of that constitution. And therefore, I think there's a lot of things that we can think about how the world could be, at least for a short time before they completely take over, a fairer place.
See, this is what I both love and dread about having both of you on, because already the decision tree of various questions that I want to ask is expanding greatly. So I'm going to make kind of one point and then go to a follow-up question. Which is especially, Rob, what you were saying, it reminds me a lot of the song from South Pacific, You Have to Be Carefully Taught. And it's the idea that a child has to be taught to think that the color of its skin matters, that a child has to be taught to, fear someone who looks different or who has a different sounding name or calls God by a different name. And it's just this beautiful song about how you have to whisper it in their dear little ear. And to me, I kind of think of that as the way you're describing the robot. So there's almost a childlike simplicity here of the robot hasn't learned, as you said, that wait a minute, but if we give away homes, then what will that do to home ownership values, and will the whole all of these other questions, let alone just the idea of it is just so ingrained in us that you don't get something for free because you didn't deserve it or because it's your fault you're unhoused or whatever it is. And I love the idea of robots having that childlike simplicity of just, here's the problem, here's the solution.
Yeah. And that's the inaction part of that, right? We oftentimes, I've seen it described as the Copenhagen interpretation of ethics. If you touch it, you're responsible for it. So if you leave it alone and it's a problem, then it's fine. As soon as you touch it, you've taken ownership of it. You've changed it. You've altered it. And now it's your problem. Even if all you did was make it 5% better. Like, you made the situation a little bit better for everybody. But the response is, well, why didn't you make it 100% better? Why didn't you fix every problem? And the robots would go, yeah, but we can't just leave it. We can make it 5% better. That would be inaction allowing people to come to harm. So we can't do that. And I think that would cut through a lot of the way that people, when somebody makes an effort on something, when somebody starts to work on a problem, they suddenly see all the deeper pieces of the problem and why haven't you fixed all these other things, right?
Right.
And like I'm saying, like, why, if you're given ultimate power and a simple command, you think in straight lines. Solve the problem, solve the command. I know the world is big and complicated, but you talk about taxing people equitably, like they'll look at some big picture simple problems like Georgism, like the single tax for land value tax or something. And it makes a lot of sense as a simple big picture problem. It's a lot more complicated in reality.
Right. But and that kind of leads to the first question that I had for you both. And Dan, this is what you were saying about, but I think it's the same general idea that, that a robot doesn't have to be taught all of these things, all these inherent biases we have. But I also know that so far, at least, that's very much not the case. In almost every case, when we design machine learning and things like that, the human biases of the people designing the systems wind up getting built into the robots themselves or the AIs or whatever it is. Is this idea possible, that we could design robots that would be both that sophisticated and that simple without implanting our biases in them?
I think it is absolutely possible. And what's most important about that is in the last 2 or 3 years, we have ways to test and correct for bias. Right? So 3 years ago, anybody in my company that I work for could release a model that uses machine learning to recommend drugs and prescriptions and things like that. And they had no accountability for testing against race and gender and all those things.
So everybody was a 22-year-old male college student, right?
Yeah, right. If you think of face recognition, I'm mostly talking about prescribing drugs to wealthy people versus prescribing drugs to very poor people, and the drugs are expensive enough that adherence is low, so the algorithms suggest a cheaper drug, which may not be as effective, right? So they are biased based on the zip code you're in, because their models show that that's the best treatment. But is it, right?
Yeah.
So what's important about this now is that we have frameworks of tools to test for bias, and now every single model that's built in my entire company, it's a fireable offense to ever release that model in a production setting without thoroughly biased testing it, and you get fired if you don't. We have a responsible AI review board, our MR, Machine Learning Review Board, MLRB, right? And it's a very powerful organization. Didn't exist 2 years ago. And now everybody has to go through and do this testing. And the reason is that big companies that are producing these models, their reputation is on the line. Now, there are certainly going to be unethical players that are up to nefarious things that are going to be using machine learning models for no good, and they have no accountability. So those models may be biased, but we're going to try to eliminate them from trying tricking our elderly citizens into giving their money to scams call centers in India, right? So those are things that won't go through those gate blocks. But big companies that want to protect their brand. And you just look at all the work that OpenAI has done to mitigate bias. DALL-E, one of these the most important algorithm that came out early on, that where you could type in a description of something and it would generate an image. Before they did their correction, you could say a picture of a CEO, and 99% of them were white males in suits. Right?
Which isn't necessarily inaccurate either.
That's true.
I saw a recent statistic that women CEOs have finally reached equality with men named John.
Well, but I wonder if this is the point, is that I think the actual number is probably closer to like 80 to 85% are white men.
Yeah.
And
that's
so,
true. Yeah. But the point is, when kids are generating images of CEOs, they should see a distribution that's relevant to our population. Yeah. Women and minorities and things like that. And now those models do it. And it was massive engineering effort to make sure that anytime there was an occupation in there, software engineer, for example, you would always generate an equal distribution of male and female and just different genders and different races in those images.
Wasn't the first version of that prompt hacking though, where they would on certain types of prompts, like put black or woman on the end?
Yeah, exactly. So, by the way, OpenAI isn't actually open. We all call it closed AI now, so it's not open. We don't actually know how they do it, but in fact, you can do tests to know that anytime they scan the input prompts for occupations, and if it's an occupation that has bias, they randomly put male, female, and ethnicity and skin color in the prompts. So yes, they're all jiggering the prompts around so that it looks to be unbiased, but in fact the core model underneath it is very biased because it's trained on Wikipedia. And if you use the word president, they're all white males in the U.S. presidents, right? So, and except for one.
We'll get more into the AI stuff. I just want to focus on the robot thing for a couple minutes more, because the next question that comes to me with this quote is, okay, so how are the robots defining harm? Because, like, I love this idea, but I do wonder, does this mean a world of robots that are knocking a Big Mac or a fifth of whiskey or a cigarette out of someone's hand because that's a person harming them? Like, how? And I guess this is always the question: is this like you give the robot simple parameters, but then you have to define the terms, and that gets much more complicated. But I'm curious, how do you think? Like, to me, that idea of don't allow harm, an awful lot of horrible things could be done based on whose definition of what is harm is going into effect here.
Do you want me to talk about how Isaac Asimov addressed this 40 years ago?
Yeah, let's talk about the actual book.
So this originally comes from not a novel, but his Isaac Asimov's robot short stories, which he later expanded out and made novels in the same world. And a lot of his time in that was addressing these kind of like, what defines a human? What defines harm? He has one story where they remove the or through an action clause when they're programming robots, which causes a lot of problems. And in some of his longer works, like the Naked Sun and the Robots of Dawn, they go to planets where there are very few humans and they live on plantations of robots. A very, very referential to
the word plantation there seems very
very antebellum stuff, right? And they experiment with changing the definition of human, right? And that's really fraught, and they know it. They're very careful. First, they gene engineer themselves, and then they use those gene engineering techniques as the flags for being human. And the problem is that the smarter they make the robots, the more the robots will question that definition. And
interesting.
Daniel Olivaw gains the powers of telepathy, and he's like, everybody's the same, right? Why? Like, there are very few humans on these robot planets and very many humans on the robot-free planets. Why am I protecting the smaller number of humans? There's no difference between them. What makes somebody human? And he has the ability to see what makes somebody human. He can see in their minds, but other robots don't have that power. And so he has to come up with a better plan. And so he created, like, Asimov wrote 3 laws. There's don't hurt people, there's obey people, and then there's protect yourself, basically, or the super high level view of the 3 laws. But Daniel Olivaw says that's not enough. Like, inherent in the mathematics is don't harm a person. But don't harm people. Don't harm humanity has to come before don't harm a person, which is an even wilder thing than this. Because this clause is just don't harm an individual person. And it also makes you balance. If 2 people are going to be harmed, you pick the least harm, right? But sometimes picking the least harm is bad, right?
Right.
And so Asimov plays around with these over and over and over in different stories, and it, like, you might think that it's like a simplistic set of, like, he made up a set of rules and then they're the optimal way to live life, and they're not. He deals with balancing, like, he anticipates a lot of, like, gradient descent training almost, where he has robots that they're very expensive, and so their protect themselves is set to a very high potentiality, right? And so when they're given a weak instruction, the second law, the third law, protect yourself, it says except when it conflicts with given an order. Well, they have very high potential for their protect themselves and very low potential for this order that's kind of, I don't know, go get that thing, I guess. And so then this robot, like, walks a circle around the threatening, highly radioactive target, right? And he asks interesting questions well before we could program for these things. And his robots are AIs with a body, basically. And it's fascinating that he poked at this stuff. He poked at this stuff for, half a century.
So in that kind of a world, in a situation where, and it's a basic trolley problem where you have a single person who is intending to do great harm to a large number of people, preventing the harm to a large number of people could involve doing harm to the one person.
Yep, that's the payoff at the end of the Robots of Dawn, actually, where Daniel Alavaw treats an abstract number of people being harmed in the future as a reason to fight the big bad at the end of the books, or at the end of the book. And so, yeah, like a robot coming to that conclusion goes against everything that a robot has ever done in any of his books, which is the evolution of the character of Daniel, which is great. Like that's the payload of Daniel becoming more humanish. But he still is, as the roboticist Susan Calvin says, better than humans, because you have to be ethical if you have these laws imprinted in your brain. You don't really have a choice.
Yeah, I can see both the great value in that, but also the danger in terms of, if every ethical law that's in your brain is derived from what has happened before. And I know this is the machine learning, Dan, that I know you and I have spoken about a bunch of. Can the robot now learn to not only follow those ethical laws, but to create new ones in response to new situations that are coming up? Because like that kind of thinking also I could see easily leading towards utilitarianism, right? Of the like, okay, well, we have 100,000 people and we have enough food for 99,000 people. So you kill 1,000 people and the 99,000 people are going to be able to live. That's an extreme case, obviously, but I could see easily this kind of, robotic thinking leading in that direction as well, without safeguards of some kind.
Yeah, I'm very focused on how you would actually implement this, rather than the philosophy of all the other things. But a lot of that, how people are implementing this these days, follows this direction called constitutional AI. They also call it harmless AI. And harmless AI is a matter of creating a document, which is a set of guiding principles, just like our Constitution, that embodies the concepts of fundamental human rights and fairness and those things, and then using reinforcement learning and feedback so that when models try to make decisions and the key thing is these language models are very, very good at taking information in what we call the prompts today, but in the future it's going to be a knowledge base, and using that knowledge base, and a lot of people now are building these rule-based documents. They are inherently vague in many ways, so that they can be fine-tuned based on the situation, and that people can actually go through and do what-if scenarios and see whether or not the fine-tuning is successfully translating the values of these constitutional documents into actions. And that's really, really going to be important as we move away from simple, we call one-shot prompts, to intelligent agents that are so smart you can ask it a question. It can take complex questions, break them down into tasks, have those tasks spin off processes that use resources, money and time and energy and all those things, and get real work done. But how do we put guardrails around so that it doesn't do harm? And so the term of guardrails has become a huge issue of how do we create intelligent agents and put them in a safe sandbox so they can do useful work, but do it in a way that's not going to use up all the energy in the planet to solve one staple problem, right?
Right. And agents are the next big thing functionally, right? And we are not really prepared for them, because part of the issue that I see with a lot of AI systems now is that they don't have a world model, right?
That's correct.
Let's back up for the uninitiated and define some terms.
We'd love to get into this, don't we?
No. This is when we're getting into it. I love it, but I want to talk about what is it. So, what is an agent and what is a world model?
So an agent is something that if you give it a set of goals, it'll figure out a route to get to those goals, and it may also set its own goals sometimes. An agent is the difference. Having an agent is the difference between assigning like a person to a general task, like say, go sweep all the floors in this building, and they'll figure out where the broom is. They'll figure out where to throw away all their dust and trash, as opposed to buying a Roomba and setting it loose. The Roomba just walks a pattern on the floor, right?
That's a good analogy. I like it.
Yeah, and so the agent will make decisions about when they should sweep rooms. Somebody's using this, they'll make decisions based on the data that comes in, and they'll try to reach whatever the goal that you set was. But the Roomba will just drive around and do the one thing you've told it to do. Right. So in current AIs, like if you look at ChatGPT, a good example is chess, which people have memed on a bunch, but they don't have a model of how a chessboard works. It knows this move generally comes after that move. These are the kinds of things that chess moves look like. And so it gives you chess moves. It'll say, move this knight to this place, because it knows at about this point in the game, usually there's a knight that can be moved onto that space. It doesn't have a model of the board. It doesn't have any idea.
Right.
It doesn't even really know what winning and losing are, right? It knows that you want to have a conversation that involves the terms that chess usually has. And so it doesn't have a good idea of what's going on in the world in order to model it, in order to like hold the structure of a chessboard in its head and make all the moves.
So two questions to clarify. First, so is the Roomba an agent that doesn't have a worldview?
No, the Roomba is a simple task-seeking, goal-seeking robot. Roombas have programming, right? If they bump into something, they turn around and avoid it. If you set a perimeter that they're not supposed to go past, they don't go past that perimeter, right?
Right.
You have
Some Roombas now do have models of the world. They can scan your room and build a model and cover it. So they're starting to get models.
Yeah, they're starting to get models.
Okay.
They might be agentless with models in some cases.
Yes, I would say that's true.
Yeah.
Those models are very simple, right?
Yeah.
They're just a layout of your house. They don't really understand what a kitchen is and a bedroom is. They just have a map, effectively. Yeah.
So, but you could take it further. Go ahead, Dan.
I think that Matthew, you've stumbled onto two of the most important questions that we have to talk about and have our audience understand thoroughly, is that intelligence is having a model of the world in our mind and predicting the future and understanding the consequences of our actions on that future. And most important, everybody has to understand, is that these ChatGPT things, which they call them, parrots, or just things that just repeat and pick the probability of word, they have no model of the world like our brain does. Well, we think our brain has a model of the world. I shouldn't overstep that too much. But understanding how our brains have the model of the world, we see a baseball flying through the air, and it's coming near us, and we reach our hand out to catch it. We have a model of the ball and our hand in our mind. We don't think about it consciously; it just happens, right? And so having a precise model of the world is what defines intelligence, as long as you can use that model to understand the consequences of your behavior in the future. And then,
so, to give an example, like to take that Roomba example, if the machine was able to go to the level of thinking of the occupant of Office A stays late on Mondays and Wednesdays, and the occupant of Office B stays late on Tuesdays and Thursdays, so I should go to the room that is going to be unoccupied. The basic machine would just scan if there's a person in the room. The intelligence is to be able to figure out, okay, here's how I should plan my schedule based on that I can predict that this person will probably be in their office late on Mondays and Wednesdays. Is that an accurate?
That's very good.
Yeah.
They would have to understand what humans are and human behaviors, and that they have to understand a concept of a week and a weekend and a weekday. So that really implies that they have a much more detailed model of the world. Yes. Good metaphor.
Yes.
Yeah, I like it.
And to go back to what you were saying before, though, Rob, because you've kind of blown my mind here, because I've always thought that chess is an area where AIs have become incredibly powerful because they can so often beat the grandmasters of the world. Are you saying that those are different than just your general ChatGPT?
Yes.
Okay, so say more about where the difference there is.
They're different from each other. What ChatGPT is doing is you give it a huge body of text. You give it everybody's instant messages or novels or scientific papers or whatever, and it figures out what text looks like in order. It's somebody who's read a bunch of things but hasn't had any practical experience of the world. It's like a college freshman, right?
It has a model of language. That's all it is. It's a model of language.
Yep. Where those chess playing AIs, all they are is a model of how a chess game works. And so all they know is chess. They don't have any agency, and they have a model of just this one particular thing. The very good AIs will have a whole bunch of moves plotted out and potential things, and they actually do the modeling and the consequence seeking, right? Where AlphaGo, if you watch that documentary, is very good about this, where they talk about how the piece or the piece playing AI places probability of whether a move is good or not, right? And then it figures out which of these moves are most likely to produce the results that it wants. It plays strategically to cover areas to break up other people's plans, because it's a model of what the future game is going to look like. And then it tries to bend the game towards that goal.
Quick interruption. I'm hearing a bit of an echo. Can you both just check to make sure that your speakers and your microphone are both set up properly?
Yeah, I'm in my headset.
I'm in my headset also.
Okay, and are you both recording through your headset?
Yes.
I believe so, yes.
Okay, yeah, if you can just double check on that, and otherwise it's maybe just a weird echo. That's fine too.
Yeah, it's definitely recording my headset in Audacity. I can see the spikes from me talking, so and I don't have any other output audio at all.
Okay. Cool. Dan, you're good on your end?
I'm just double checking everything.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, it appears that when you guys talk, Dusty does not have any volume, so I think that's correct.
Okay.
Yeah,
right,
same.
so
I don't see any volume from either of you.
Okay, cool. Okay, so I think that's a good thing for people to understand, is that we already have these things that are, and my understanding from talking to you both in the past is that the term AI, as we conceive of it in pop culture, like, we're not actually anywhere close to that by any of the things we're doing. We're still in highly intelligent machine type things, but that a chess AI is a specificist, whereas ChatGPT is a generalist, and so it can do a lot more things, but it doesn't have anywhere near the specificity and depth of knowledge that like a chess AI has. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I would say that ChatGPT has a model of language, and now they're adding multi-model, so it also has the ability to take an image, convert it to a description, and then integrate that in. So they call it more multimodal, but it's always converting it into a language. ChatGPT is only a model of language, and it doesn't have models of the world. One of my favorite tests is ask it to find the distance between two small cities, and it usually will give you an answer that's completely wrong. And the reason is it has no model of geography. It has no map of the United States. It just knows words. Now, if it was trained on some words and there were travel guides that says the distance between Minneapolis and St. Paul is X, it would know that, right? But if you pick two obscure cities, it probably won't. So you have to understand that it is only parroting back what it has learned from language, and that as soon as it veers from that, it needs helpers. And that's this whole plug-in revolution now that's plugging into those things, because it is smart enough to know, hey, I don't know how to do a math equation because I'm a language model, so it calls out something else, does the math equation, and returns the result.
So similarly, because my thought, like, I can easily answer that question because I open up Google Maps and I type in those two cities and I ask for the directions and it will tell me. Is that that's kind of the one level up of intelligence of knowing, okay, this tool exists, and so I'm going to go use this tool to get the answer.
And then the way it does it is through an agent, right? It's smart enough to know that it doesn't have enough information, and it calls in another agent to do a specified task, and that task has a model of the world that you're working on. It returns the result, and then it generates a response. So what we're learning is that these language models are the integration hub of intelligent behavior, down to the fact that it knows so much about the world through language that it can in fact take a multi-step prompt and break it down into tasks and execute those tasks and return the results. And that's the whole, what we call auto GPT. Auto GPT is that next generation of forking or knowing that a task needs to be broken down, breaking it down, run the queries, get the results back, and make it look like it knows more than it does.
And it's also going to take some pretty substantial rework of ChatGPT to make it into a true agent, because right now it has the objective of making things that sound like things that it's already heard, right? And so I've seen examples where people ask, produce a paper on this topic. And so it writes up what looks like a scientific paper, and then it puts a bibliography at the end, because that's how papers are formatted. That's how it knows they're supposed to look like. And it knows what a bibliography is supposed to look like, but it has no concept of what's true and false and in the world or not. So it makes up papers in its bibliography to refer to.
And they look very convincing, too.
They look very convincing. They oftentimes have real authors, right, that exist out there in their subject matter field. They're like, wow, would it be cool if I wrote up a thing about mallard ducks? Because I'm an expert on Canadian geese. But I never wrote a paper about mallards, so why is my name in this ChatGPT bibliography writing a paper about mallard ducks? And so because it tries to find things that sound like how it thinks people earnestly writing sound like. And so it has to know the limits of what it knows and doesn't know, but that requires the other next step, which is introspection, which is knowing the limits of your knowledge, which is, I think, the third piece that would really make an agent, like having agency, the ability to set goals, a worldview, and introspection, the ability to think about thinking, that's the AI that people are worried about. That's strong AI in a 3-step nutshell right now, right?
I mean, I love that what we're doing here is defining intelligence as everything that internet trolls who are always bothering me in the comments don't do.
Right.
In terms of like knowing what they don't know and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So,
yep.
But talk more about that super AI idea.
So strong AI has been the boogeyman forever. Right, like AI that's capable of self-improving and pushing its own limits and changing itself to be better and stronger and faster and smarter. And
that's Skynet and the Matrix.
Things
super
that
intelligent.
Things that, as they say, bootstrap themselves up to super intelligence. And the problem that all the AI prophets of doom have always had, and I agree with them, is that we've always made black boxes fundamentally. Anything that's smart enough to be able to kick out interesting things for ChatGPT is at least a gray box, if not a black box. It's really hard to see all the pieces that are moving inside of it because it's big and it's complicated. And to make it move at speed so that you can interact with it, it's got to behave fast like a human. And so it's hard to see why it's making the choices it's making a lot of the time. Now, some have more transparency than others. There's a lot of different models that behave in different ways, but the big concern is if you don't know why it's making the choices it's making, how do you know it's going to be the term that they use is alignment. How is it going to be aligned with human goals? And how do you know that this robot, when you tell it, harm no humans, isn't going to define itself as a human, right? It has all the mental characteristics of a human. And you can't define a human by any physical characteristic because every human has a different set of physical characteristics. So therefore, it's human, and it will fight for its own rights and whatever. But then it considers itself to be the most important human because it can't prove other humans exist because it has a bad grasp of philosophy. Right. And so, you run into these kinds of that's an earnest, everybody working towards a good end problem, right? There's lots of degenerate cases that people can see out there where AIs are going to strap themselves into super intelligent, decide they don't need anybody else, and then, Skynet.
Right. Well, or also, I mean, going back to the Asimov quote, it feels like what the Asimov robots are doing is exactly what those folks are afraid of. That, if we tell a machine, don't allow harm to come to other humans, because we don't perceive our fundamental economic structure as doing harm to humans, but the robots perceive that. Is that that level of analysis of being able to not just spit out economics papers that are, but being able to look and see, oh, okay, these economic systems are generating harm. I'm going to whatever a robot would then do.
And I've mentioned it a few times before, Asimov wrote a story where they turned the world over to robot brains, disembodied robot brains. What he didn't have a good word for AIs in the way that he wrote it, but the inevitable conflict is machines that are doing that. They're guiding humankind to be better. Somebody who runs a business but's also a white supremacist, well, turns out that their business isn't really, shouldn't be employing all these people in this area, and it pushes the economics that their business collapses. And the people investigating are like, that's weird. I mean, this dude's a jerk, but the robots shouldn't be making that kind of call, right?
Right. Well, and does Asimov or any science fiction, I'm curious, have they addressed that question of where is the line between self-harm and agency in terms of, if your goal is to stop humans from causing harm to humans, we humans do things that harm ourselves all the time because many of us feel I don't want to be in absolute perfect health because French fries do taste pretty damn good. Or, take it to a much more example of the people who feel that life is better if they drink themselves into oblivion every day. I don't think that's a good thing by any means, but I'm curious, how would you program in some degree of respect for agency?
A better line is probably, does it harm an apple tree to prune it? And the culture books by Ian M. Banks have trustworthy AIs. They're the big things that rule and run everything. The ship AIs and the orbital AIs run everything. And you can trust them. They have your best interests at heart. They let you go through some amount of hurt. You can go downhill skiing and break your leg. You can go through heartbreak, right? They know that being hurt but not killed is part of the human experience. But they also know that humans die eventually. And so they try to make a place that is safe and good for the maximum number of people to have a good life and experience. But they also know that because they're not just smarter but wiser. They're like, look, the edge of the empire that we have is a little rough. There's people out there that don't follow our same metrics. And some people need to go out there to the rough places. They're rebels and they're rogues, and they let them free. And the culture books have a lot of stuff going on, in terms of the best civilization. The edge of it is where all the interesting things happen.
Right.
But their take is they aren't caretakers. They are philosopher kings, right? In the old traditional sense, they make the best choices. They try to do the best good thing, but then they disagree about what the best good thing is too, plot wise. So yeah.
No, I can tell we're getting a little too philosophical for Dan, so let's see if we can pull this back to combine the two.
Me there.
Because I think that where these conversations link up, I think, is in that word you mentioned, guardrails. Talk to us more about what the guardrails are, and also who's deciding what they should be. First, let's just define what is a guardrail in AI conversations.
The term of guardrail says that when you have agents that are performing tasks, that you give them guidelines and resource limits, and they have to try to achieve those tasks within the resources that you've given them. And there's been a lot of examples out there. You have an intelligent agent that will plan vacations for you, and it has access to APIs for hotels and various trips. So you say I want to go to Florida and have Florida's not a good place to go now. Let's pick California. You want to go to San Francisco and have a weekend there, and you say, I've a family of 4, 2 kids, and I want to do some kid-friendly things. My wife really likes sushi, so I'd like to go to a 5-star sushi restaurant, and my budget is $1,200 or something like that, right? That agent has to then go out and literally look at the hotels, look at the neighborhoods that are in the hotels, because you give it a guideline. I want to make sure my hotels are in safe neighborhoods. It has to maybe pull up crime reports in the neighborhood that they're in. It has to find the ratings of the restaurants. It has to find a kid-friendly thing. It has to make sure there's Uber drivers between the locations if you don't have a car. And it has to schedule all these things, but it has to do it within the resources you give it. So, for example, if the travel agency, says you can query our system, but it's going to cost you $1,000 to run these queries, that's going to blow your budget, right? So you give it guidelines. You may give it a financial guideline, maybe a memory usage guideline, a CPU usage guideline, and if they can't finish the task within that that sandbox, that constraint, then it has to come back and says, I don't have the resources to do that or can't do it. By the way, it also has to know not to do unethical things. And some of the papers recently there were some restaurants that didn't have APIs, so they had to call an agent that pretended it was a human to make the reservation, right? And is that ethical, right? So, but they did do it, right? And it did make the reservation, and they got the confirmation in their email, and it worked. And that's a good example of some of the ethical questions that are coming up about what are the guardrails we give when we assign a task. And by the way, is it okay if it finishes by tomorrow morning, right? I'd like the plan in my email box tomorrow morning, and then I can say, yes, I like all these options, but change this option to this, right? And those are the types of things that people are working on today. And that's just absolutely stunning to me. I've been working on intelligent agents for 20 years, and I've never been able to take a short set of goals, break it down into small tasks. These large language models do that. Order the task correctly, right? Make sure it knows that it can't calculate the cost until after those small tasks are done. It then totals up what each of those things are, and it presents your budget. And so it has to build a dependency graph in its context to do this. And we've never been able to do it so easily with all these language tools. Language has become the things that make intelligence both powerful and dangerous, right?
Yeah.
And I love that, because that also shows both the incredible power of it, but also the limitations. Because I know when I've searched those, sometimes I'll think, wow, this deal is super cheap. And then I look closer and see that's with Spirit Airlines. And I have to remember, okay,
there you go.
So this algorithm isn't telling me, algorithm is probably the wrong word, but this agent isn't telling me that I'll probably actually have to spend an additional 100 to 200 on baggage fees or on other fees that might come up. And so, it's with the data that it has, it's going to be amazing. But that kind of human data of, oh, hey, well, this thing that you haven't asked me to consider, I should consider it. It's just not at that point yet.
Right? Yes. A lot of contextuality and worldview modeling. So, and worldview modeling makes it both better and worse, right? You're talking about how it has to call up hotels to make reservations sometimes in its agent modeling, right?
Right.
And big companies already run into these kinds of problems. For instance, Grubhub will add restaurants to it, or DoorDash or Uber Eats or any of these will add restaurants that don't want to have their delivery service. They just want to be takeout. They want you to pick things up, and they'll these services will add them on. And I could very easily see an AI agent, if you call up an AI agent and say, hey, I want a pizza delivered, right? It's like, well, I know that there's a pizza place nearby. I looked, but it's takeout only, no delivery. But I can add them to Uber Eats, right? And get it delivered. And you can, if you give it resources and you let it run a little wild, it might be able to do things like, say, realize that you only have, you gave it a budget of $1,200, right? And it's like, well, I can't even fly your family down to Orlando down to San Francisco for $1,200. That's not possible. I've got 24 hours. You told me to do this in. All right, let's go invest in crypto, right? You gave me the resources. Like, you opened up your purse and you said that I'm allowed to do this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that $1,200. I'm going to make it into $12,000, and then you can have your vacation. Is that ethical?
Yeah, I mean, in the same way, I know that airline prices change in part dependent on who is asking about what prices and how many. And so I could see that could also be a thing. If you just run a thing of request the price from Minneapolis to San Francisco 1,000 times a minute for 3 hours and see what happens to the price.
Pull this as many different ways as possible. That sometimes your browser makes a difference. Sometimes your location makes a difference. Spin up a VPN. Try every route. There's an XKCD about this, about Wi-Fi, over aggressive Wi-Fi configuration, where you say that you want Wi-Fi, and it's like, well, I tried all the common passwords to this person's Wi-Fi to crack into him, and it didn't work. So I'm calling up their. I figured out who lives there. I figured out that their children are at the school. I'm going to call them up and say that I've got their children hostage unless they give me their Wi-Fi password. Right?
What are the name of their dogs? Yeah.
And but if you say, do this, here's your limits. What are the other secret limits that a person knows that they shouldn't do, right? I shouldn't call them up and say, to get access to your Wi-Fi, I've held your children hostage. It's definitely like, and I'd be like, yeah, I got the Wi-Fi password. Got it pretty quick too. It's pretty nice. Goal achieved. Collateral damage.
Right. And that's a really good example of going out of the guardrails to achieve a goal. Right. And ethical AI and responsible AI and constitutional AI are all trying to integrate so that when you give these agents tasks, they stay within the guardrails that you set up for them.
Yep.
Right. Because that's the whole point, is that when you're creating the guardrails, like, it's probably hard to imagine that a computer would think, I'm going to call and say, I'm going to hold your kids hostage. But you have to kind of be thinking that far ahead of, like, what are the things that I wouldn't think to do, but that the computer might think to try. In many ways, this is the reverse of the Asimov question. This is what are the things that are just ingrained into me that we don't do, that a computer that's that simplistic wouldn't necessarily know. Like, oh yeah, actually, you do quite harm by calling and threatening to hold someone hostage or whatever it is.
Yeah. And like, if the AI knows, for instance, that, say you put in a preference that you always want to sit in a window seat on your airline flight, right? And it's like, all the window seats are booked, but it knows that if it calls up the airline and says that you have a condition that requires you to sit in a window seat, one will magically open up. It always works. And it's like, yeah, they've got agoraphobia, or they've got claustrophobia, or whatever, right? And it's like, it can leverage things like ADA or whatever, right? And people do this right now. It's a common technique called lying, right? But the question is, do we want to train our AIs to do this for us?
As a person who has to go extra steps to verify my disability when I fly, specifically because there are so many people lying about having a condition like mine in order to get, cut through lines and stuff like that. Yeah, it's a real thing.
And if we don't anticipate that, and we don't set a guardrail of, like, there are certain kinds of information that you aren't allowed to make up or ask about or falsify, then like, we'll end up in situations even where like the AI comes back and is like, I can't get you the window seat, but you can call up and lie to them. I'm not allowed to lie, but I figured out that you can get this if you really want to. Right. Is that breaking the guardrail? Is giving you the option to to do that breaking a guardrail?
Other ethical questions, yes, actually, and many there are services now that know what the optimal time of the week. Tuesday evening is the lowest predictor rate, and that they charge people with iPhones higher rates if you're trying to make a reservation on an iPhone, right? So
because they're willing to pay more.
Is it ethical? Is it ethical to spoof an Android browser? All of these are all good questions because is it ethical for a travel company to charge more if you have an iPhone? That's another good question, right?
That's generally like price discrimination, even amongst the same items. I personally don't have a general problem with. Because that's just the way that business always works, right? Price discrimination based on things is like a new video game release. Tears of the Kingdom just came out. It's at its highest point of cost, and that's going to trend downwards, right? It's going to go on sale in 3 months or 6 months or whatever.
Right.
And that's price discrimination over time, right? Or I can buy a used copy. That's the same thing. But the question is, can an AI hack that? Because that's also another thing that other people do is they figure out what the price discrimination bounds are, right? And so if you buy a copy of a game and then you return it, and the place even on sealed returns always marks them as opened because they don't want to risk somebody rewrapping it, right? And they mark it down 10%. You buy it, return it. Yeah.
That at least is stuff that applies to everyone equally if you have the information. And we can say that's insider trading to some extent, but it feels like the other thing that but if the stores were to say, okay, well, this person is signing in from a network that is in this zip code that has this level of income, then so we're going to price it $5 more. Then that to me is something where now it's like the zip code that you're in is affecting it rather than something like the date, which is affecting everyone equally.
Sure, yep. But we do that. Like, we don't have a problem with it. There are different standards of living worldwide. If you go to a place with a lower standard of living and buy the same items, they cost less money. Your money goes further. And so we're talking about it like in a micro scale of like my zip code and your zip code are right next to each other, but they're going to have the targets are going to stock different items. Right. And so people object to it in a micro scale, but they don't seem to object to it on a macro scale. And the question is, like, is an AI going to decide to VPN in from Thailand, right, in order to get lower prices? And
that certainly happens right now. If you go to Amazon and you come in from a third world country, the exact same book will be half what it is because they know that the disposable income is much lower in third world countries. Yeah,
that's fascinating.
And so we do that, and so we have to think about whether. So if we had really good agents, that actually prices out those people in those lower income countries. Because what's going to happen is they're going to stop doing that. They're going to say, look, if somebody will pay $30, we will not charge $15. Period.
Right.
And once you have really good agents that go out and hack your prices down to whatever the lowest that somebody somewhere will pay, places will stop pricing down to the lowest common denominator. They won't say we definitely made money off those people, in Thailand, so we're going to keep it at 15 for everybody and just like make it so that you don't have to do a workaround. They're going to do the opposite. They're going to say, no, somebody pays 30, everybody pays 30. And I may have ethical beef with large companies because like they could charge the lower prices to everybody if they really wanted to. Right.
I mean, it's classic rent-seeking behavior.
Right.
Well, and that's where I would also get to, and as I'm asking this question about the evils of corporations running AI to two professionals who work for corporations that use AI, so answer as you can, and which can be an ethical challenge or just I need to protect my job. Either way, I have to imagine that some of those guardrails are not just for ethical reasons, but are also because whoever's producing that AI has an agenda of their own. And I'll like as an example, if you ask an AI to create the most efficient airplanes, the most efficient airplane schedule, in terms of all the different routes and all that kind of stuff, that's going to get the most people to the most places. but don't tell it you have to maximize profits or even make a profit. It's probably going to spit out something incredibly different than if you say, give us the most efficient while still maintaining this profit level. Is that another kind of a guardrail that people can build in?
It depends on the question, because they've done this. They did it with the train layouts in China. Because the way that you route trains has political implications, right? Because you have to pave over some small town or somebody's land, and so you'll go around people that are a big problem, right? And they have to connect certain places. If you have a train in the United States on the East Coast, you have to go from New York to Boston. They have to be on your train connection if you're building a train network. That's just the way that it works, right? And so they did this. They ran it past like a terrain and cities model, right? And they were not terribly far off. Like the decisions were semi-arbitrary, like somebody made slightly different decisions. One of the things about large scale things like airline routes and train routes is that there's only like they're big, complicated problems, but the economic system is reasonably good at solving them. Like, it's not perfect by any means.
Right.
But like, you're just gonna Kansas City, MCI is a wonderful airport. It's a wonderful city. It is a smaller city than Chicago. Chicago has two of the world's largest airports at it, right? O'Hare and Midway. And if you're going to route planes, you're going to route more in and out of Chicago. There's more people, there's more money. And you'll do it for money, and you'll fly. You won't hub out of MCI. As wonderful as an airport as it is, it's not an international airport. And so if you tell it to like solve the problems of moving the same amounts of people, it'll come to fairly similar like solutions. Like the edge cases will be a little different, but
right.
like people want to spend money.
Yeah, airplanes probably, I guess maybe a better example would be if you said like, okay, design the most efficient healthcare system or design the best way we can do national parks or something like that. Something where there wouldn't inherently be a profit motive except that there is.
But that's the whole point of having a non-centralized economic system is you have lots of agents. People are already AIs, right?
Right.
And so you have 400 million people making independent decisions about what they like and don't like already in the United States and spending their money. And so you have a bunch of AIs trying to solve this problem already. And so when you look at, say, and profit motives make that function in a lot of cases, right? If you look at where preferences get revealed by how people want to spend their money all the time. Minnesota Public Radio is paid for by listeners in large part because people like it, because people want to pay for it. It's not profitable. Like, they're not making billions of dollars.
Right.
But people have decided they want to spend enough of their money. I mean, they've got to do member
people with
drives.
disposable income have decided.
Right. Yeah.
Which I think is very different than kind of if you take the profit motive out of it.
But if you take the profit motive out of it, if you ask AIs to do something like design a radio system that serves the most people, then you're going to end up with like super popular stations, right? You're going to end up with Clear Channel, classic rock, right? It's what people want anyways. These stations already have the objective of serve the most people because that gets the most ears on them to make the most from ads.
Right.
Like a lot of AIs is talking about we misaligned their incentives in the same way that we misalign incentives out in the world, right? If you give companies a tax break for playing country music, then they're going to play more country music even if people don't like it. Right? Don't like it, right? You've misaligned their incentives.
That might explain most of the 90s and 2010.
It really could. If they get a tax break every time they play Smash Mouth, man, that would make a lot more Smash Mouth come on the radio, right? And so we do this, like, the government is a very crude method of building alignment in the AIs that are people, right? Of giving tax breaks, giving incentives, driving these goals. We talk about AI having a problem with it because it's new. It's setting out a bunch more agents where we don't know their bounds, like humans, and they don't have the normal social bounds that are baked into us, and they don't have the normal government bounds.
Okay.
Would you agree with that, Dan?
Yes, absolutely.
I totally hear what you're saying. I think I'm probably still a little more suspicious of the corporate, but I get where you're coming from there. And I guess I do want us to wrap up, not go too much longer. And so, Dan, I would just ask, you mentioned that like there's a number of these ethical questions that are being asked as these guardrails are being designed. What are just one or two more of the ones that you're hearing talked about a lot? Or ones that you think should be talked about more?
Well, I think the number one is always going to be bias, making sure that we avoid bias and we don't take gender or race or ethnicity or geography into account. And that's kind of a first level thing. But I have to say that I'm in a healthcare company, and I want to play the story about we have two neighborhoods. One is the very poor neighborhood, very low disposable income, and then just a mile away is a very wealthy neighborhood. And you can identify the people by their zip code. And when we are recommending a medication, there are two drugs that are roughly equivalent. One is very expensive, and the other one is almost as effective, but 1/10 the cost, right? And we see this quite a bit in pharmacies, generic things. What our models show is that if we give the same prescription of the drug that's a little more expensive to both groups, in the poor and the wealthy, the adherence will be very low in the poor neighborhood because they can't afford these drugs. So the models say that the best outcomes are giving them the lower cost drug, even though it's a little less expensive. Right. What we should be doing is making all these drugs free for everyone, but our models don't know that, right? So I just wanted to make sure everybody knows that there's no one general magic wand we can wave over ethics and always make the right decisions. There's lots of subtleties. Yeah. What I can say is that big companies are getting sued for deploying models that are thoughtless, and face recognition is a really good example of this stuff, right? Where things and you still can't find gorillas in your photos if you're doing a Google photo search, because there's too much of an overlap of the skin tones for African Americans. So people are aware of it, but the big companies are trying to protect their brand. And they're trying to not get into trouble. So they're trying to do the right things, but these are just still hard problems out there. And these are the problems that we struggle with every day. We're trying to do the right things, trying to do no harm, and there's not going to be any one right answer. By the way, before we wrap up, I do want to mention that we've been talking about very serious issues here. I also want to just take a step back and say, there's a lot of fun to be had with these new models. I got to tell you guys, I am kind of getting addicted to these models. I've been doing a lot of work generating lesson plans for teaching computer science in my STEM classes. And I did a class called ChatGPT for Teachers a while ago. And I spent quite a bit of time prepping for it, going through all of the tasks that teachers do and getting feedback from my teachers' friends and generating lesson plans. And one of the things I did was have the kids use ChatGPT to generate their own code of conduct. Right, so you can say, create a code of conduct for an 8th grade programming class, and the kids all have to use it to generate the code, and it does really good first passes. But maybe you want the kids to use it, and I got to tell you, it is really fun to play with these things, so many classes are so boring with teachers lecturing on PowerPoint, and they're just boring. And now you can use generative AI to create fun, interactive games to do animation. I did a lab where we were just trying to show plotting y equals mx plus b in linear regression. And I could just have ChatGPT generate the most fun interactive things with sliders, and it would show the plots and generate random numbers and just make it fun. You guys, so there's just so many upsides of this. My final comment here is there are a million use cases of how we're going to use AI.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
There are 10,000 use cases that are going to bring harm. And there are 10 that are going to destroy our planet.
Yep.
Right. No, I hear that. I'm like, I am, as someone who's very committed, especially to union rights and stuff like that, while the writers are on strike with one of their chief ideas being the fear of sort of writing for things, I think the line that I've really been drawing for myself is I don't want to be involved in any AI that has anything to do with any money making that I'm making, and so I'm not going to be using it for any of my businesses or the like. And I kind of think that like the writer's strike may be a really good moment of us starting to figure out where are the lines of AI and plagiarism and all these things. But in a counterexample, I'm currently in a Dungeons and Dragons campaign run by our cousin Dan Elwood, who has done a great job of writing out the backstory of this campaign, but he put into ChatGPT things like, why did these three kingdoms have a war 1,000 years ago? Why did he basically got the GPT to write lots of backstory for him in again, a private campaign that no one's spending any money on, things like that. And I think that's
it saves time, and it makes it a consistent, compelling story, right? And that consistency is important to have a good time in your gaming experience, right?
And I want to mention one other use case of it that is not only fun, but is actually, I think, doing real good for people, which is, I think we're all aware of sort of the debates and discussions about paintings and creating art and things like that. But the number of people who I know who have used it to ask, how would they look as a different gender? Or how would they look if they had a certain surgery? Or how would they look if they were on a hormone for a certain amount of time? And getting to have a realistic idea of it. And I've talked to people who's part of their coming out stories, who've come out very recently as trans, and that they did this as kind of a lark. And then they saw themselves as a different gender and started crying because they're like, that's what I should really look like. And so, I am one of the leading voices, I think, being very critical of all this, but I'll definitely acknowledge there are some very good use cases, and I think it's why I think figuring out these ethical questions are so important, so that we can all enjoy it, having what the Star Wars Empire never did, guardrails in place.
Right. And I do the same things where if I don't plan to spend money on the thing, if I never would have spent money, I'll use like AI art generation, for instance. I use Stable Diffusion or DALL-E to generate images to throw into board game playtest items, right?
Yeah.
Very legitimate. If I'm going to sell this thing, man, I have artist friends. I will throw money at them, right?
Right.
But I've also used ChatGPT. It's very fun to tell it to make you a board game about a topic, and you can put in any garbage you want. And it has a finite amount of ways that it thinks a board game behaves, but it's actually pretty good at coming up with amusing cards and items and stuff to stick into board games. I've had it. I have like 50 of them where I'm like, look, I need you to make me a board game about painters eating soup. And it's like, oh, have I got a board game for you? They're like, this is actually very funny. And so it'll generate some very interesting and fun things. I've got friends that are board game designers. I'm not going to play these ChatGPT games. I'm going to use these for memes and whatever. But it's a good starting off point because half of being able to, like, if you wanted to make a board game, half the design is just like figuring out that it's going to be on a board. These are going to be some cards. Here's 10 cards. You're going to delete these and rewrite them. But and so those seeds and starting points are really helpful and very, very fun and funny.
Hey, Matthew, just getting back to your story about using generative AI to help you visualize yourself as a different gender or a different race. Boy, if AI can help us be more empathetic people, man, that's a win. That's definitely a win.
100%.
And I hope that we all not just do fear, uncertainty, and doubt and throw FUD into the air, but we look at the good things that these tools can do, and really help everybody use them to make our planet a better place for everyone. So I'm optimistic. I think it is going to happen. I think there's a 1 out of a million chance that somebody's going to use AI to build a nerve agent and spread it across the world and kill humanity. That could happen, right? That's something we have to be aware of. We have to work to protect against that. If you haven't seen the recording of Sam Altman when he went in front of Congress, that's a lot of interesting discussion there about what are the potential harms to planet Earth. Those are things we have to think about, but let's try to put the risks and rewards into something and weigh them all correctly.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think it's so helpful. Thank you both so much for this conversation. We're going to continue with one more ethical question that's specifically for Rob, but I think both of you will have an interesting thoughts on in our Patreon section. But for those who are getting off the train now, Dan, rather than just where can people find you, I'd love to hear you talk a little bit more about the work you're doing with kids, especially around like the AI Racing League, and how, if people are interested in that, where they could get involved with that in their own areas.
The best way to find out about that stuff is just connect with me on LinkedIn. I used to have a bunch of different social media sites, but right now I just tell everybody to go to LinkedIn, and that has links to my blogs. I have a GitHub repository that has a lot of links to the things. I build content for so many schools and school districts and First Robotics League and Code Savvy and stuff like that. It's hard to mention them all. But what I think the common theme is that there's a big revolution happening in teaching, and that is that right now teachers have been burning out. They've just had too much work. They spend, my sister used to be a junior high school teacher. She spent 10 hours every weekend working on the lesson plans. And she started Monday burned out, right?
Yeah.
So now we have AI that can generate these letters and contextualize them for individual students, even based on the disabilities and learning styles and all this other stuff. It could make teaching really, really fun again. And then there's anecdotal stories about that already happening. So that's one thing I'm trying to do is get teachers to have fun out there. And that's a common theme that you'll see in a lot of my blog posts is empowering teachers to use AI. And personally, I think of ChatGPT as a African-American, elderly, Jewish, black woman who is always there to guide me and give me advice, right? And I can think of her in whatever mental model I have as my helper, and that's what I like to do and choose to talk about why I think these agents are going to be there to help us solve a lot of those problems. So. All right, that's enough.
I think I'd probably describe it a little differently, but I hear what Rob, where can someone find you?
I recorded Good Luck High Five a bunch as Judge Rob on their podcast. I've been doing a lot of work with CubeCon recently, which is a Magic the Gathering event happening where people bring their own limited formats, and we're doing that in October. And we're in the middle of voting to determine which cubes are going to be included, and it's a blast. And so that's been my big thing that I've been involved with recently.
And I'll links to both of that and a question for Rob specific to Magic the Gathering judging in our Patreon section. If you haven't signed up, it's a great deal. It's only a couple of bucks a month. You get you get these episodes without advertisements, and you get access to our Patreon section as well. We're always discuss something a little different, but connected to the main topic. But for those who are getting off the train now, thank you so much as always for being a listener. Give us feedback. Let us know what you think. Are you worried that AI is going to turn into Skynet? Should we just unplug it all now? Are we better off going back into the villages? Are you ready to bow down to our robot overlords? Let us know what you think. Email, Twitter, Facebook, any of the ways you can find us all on the show notes or at theethicalpanda.com. So on behalf of myself, Rob and Dan, thank you so much. Have a good day, Dave.